has so far been unable to perform successfully. He will try now. Listen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name, I am Michel de la Vega, and I've got a secret.
Very good. My hands and fear not, so Michel, I am in your hands and I fear.
This video will not discuss the effectiveness nor how to perform hypnosis, but will focus on its relevancy in our society today and its impact. Hypnosis has existed all the way throughout human history. The idea of controlling another and their ideas seems invaluable. It wasn't until the 1700s that hypnosis started to find its roots in clinical and psychological healing by a man named Franz Mesmer, which is in fact where the word mesmerize comes from.
Mesmer first believed that the magnets exerted the invisible force of animal magnetism. Later, he thought that the force emanated from within him, and he abandoned the magnets. In actuality, Mesmer had only rediscovered another lost occult art. The first induced hypnotic performance, recorded on papyrus in a British museum, was given at the court of Khufu in Egypt over 5,000 years ago. Later, seers of the Greek oracle of Delphi used self-hypnosis to foresee the future.
Modern hypnosis, as practiced in the United States, begins with Franz Mesmer. But if you go back even further, every culture has a way of going into a trance. It could be using music, it could be using dance, it could be sitting in meditation.
His treatment became popular in the 1770s. And Mesmer's fame quickly spread as scores of patients claimed themselves cured through mesmerism.
He was able to put people in a trance and suggest to them things that were good, like getting better, like healing. He became famous for that, and they actually had to have a committee of scientists, and that was actually Ben Franklin was one of the committee who tried to decide whether anything about this was real or not. They said, well, mesmerism works, but we think it works because of the imagination, not some other operative principle.
Mesmer was dismissed by many as a quack.
With the rise of the psychological practice and research, hypnosis became a tool utilized by some psychologists to possibly aid in the treatment of traumatic and negative memories. Not only the psychological field was interested in hypnosis, however, but as well as the forensic field. It was believed that hypnosis could be used to recall hidden or suppressed memories about criminal incidents. While it is true that hypnosis was causing the recollection of new memories, those memories would have devastating consequences. Let us first talk about a man named Frederick Clay. At 16 years old, Fred was sentenced to life in prison without parole for murdering a 28-year-old taxi driver. Fred had a good alibi in his foster mother, who testified that he was at home during the time of the murder. Despite this, Fred was convicted due to several key witnesses that identified him as the killer, and for 38 years, Frederick Clay would spend the prime of his life inside of a prison cell. Finally, in 2016, new evidence arose about the witnesses' testimonies being unreliable, particularly a witness who changed his testimony after being hypnotized by the prosecution. Luckily, after nearly 40 years of being falsely imprisoned, Frederick became a free man.
The first time I walked without shackles, so it's strange. It feels strange. I've been locked up since I was 16 years old, and now I'm 53, so there's a lot of life I need to make up on.
District Attorney Dan Conley, who was not in that office when Clay was convicted, says investigators used unfair tactics not allowed today, like hypnotized witnesses, but he stopped short of calling Clay innocent.
I cannot say that with absolute certainty, but I do say this: he did not receive a fair trial.
Clay walked outside with his hands in the air instead of in cuffs.
Why we will never know what sort of tactics of hypnosis and manipulation the prosecution used in 1981, it's clear that they used these hypnotic measures to falsify the memory of a witness. It has been proven that memory is not always reliable, and often the brain will fill gaps of memory or dispose of memory it deems invaluable, which leads to faulty or sometimes false recollection of new memory. This, of course, is just a leading theory, but this is really where the horror of hypnosis comes from, because it causes the fabrication of new neural pathways and really the change of reality. A study in 2021 at a Dutch university found the majority of people still believed in the idea of repressed or unconscious memories. The study reads, "Therapists, judges, law enforcement, and students often believe in the existence of automatic and unconscious repression. Such a belief can be perilous, as it might lead therapists to suggestively search for repressed memories, leading to false memories." Hypnosis is one of the leading contributors to these false memories. If hypnosis is needed to recover repressed memories, the likelihood of remembering events based on true reality will be based on complete coincidence or chance.
Began the first day by him telling me that I had a death wish, that his exact words were, to have a death wish to the magnitude that you have, you had to have buried something so traumatic and so horrible that it would take years of hard work and hypnosis to uncover uncover the damage, uncover what caused it.
Laura Paisley is a prime example of the recovered memory movement, a psychological therapy practice gaining roots in the 80s and 90s. Therapists would use methods such as hypnosis, meditation, and journaling to try and recover repressed traumatic memories that were causing whatever mental illness their clients were dealing with at the time. Laura was one of these people that went into therapy in 1985 for bulimia, but would never be the same afterwards.
I told him right off the bat that I had been sexually molested as a child. It was an event that I had suppressed off and on throughout my life, but I basically remembered it happening. I was at a swimming pool, and I was 9 years old, and it was a molestation. But he told me that wasn't deep enough, and it wasn't repressed, so we had to go deeper. Totally discounted it. He was only the second person that I had told in my whole life, and so, I felt kind of negated, perceiving my family differently. They became people who had the potential to hurt me, the potential to be evil, when I had never known that before. We had problems in our family, but I never perceived them as evil people. After that, the images just kept getting bigger and bigger each time. Every single session, he had me then coming twice a week. I'd gone from once to twice a week, and the images started getting worse and worse. My older brother had begun in the images molesting me, at different times, and then it escalated to my mother. I had one particular flashback where I was sexually abused with a coat hanger by my mother. And at that point, he began telling me how evil my mother was.
I had to pause right here and just say that this is absolutely crazy. From her perspective, this sounds like the worst therapist in the world. She's opened up to him about his past trauma, and he just dismissed it like it was nothing. And this is absolutely insane.
I'm gonna pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
I think it's absolutely an outrage from every point of view, from a scientific point of view, from a legal point of view, from an ethical point of view, from a mental health point of view. First of all, there is no such thing as recovered memory as it's being described by the movement of therapists who have created this. There is no evidence to believe, and much evidence to not believe, the idea that a person could be repeatedly traumatized. We're not talking about an occasional, one event at a very young age. We're talking about claims of rape, violent sexual assault, sometimes even violent killings or maimings, sometimes involving events of truly horrendous nature, such as group ritual mutilations, animal mutilations, and all kinds of things like that. But even in cases that don't get that far, we're talking about allegations which involve repeated bodily violations in the age range of, 8, 9 years old up to 15, 16 years old, and then the claim that I didn't know about this until my therapy helped me recover. What happens then is that they are supposed to rework the trauma. They are supposed to empower themselves. The idea is you were a victim, you were small and weak, and somebody more powerful than you took advantage of you. What you have to do now is take back your power. The way you do that depends on the therapist's preferences.
Laura and several other victims, primarily women, would go on to sue these therapy practices and would ultimately be successful in their attempts. The emotional and mental trauma put forth on a woman like Laura would take years to heal and often required additional therapy to overcome these experiences, which has to be the most counterproductive form of psychological healing. It is because of cases like this we saw the decline of RMT, or the recovered memory therapy, and the overall decline of hypnotic practices in clinical psychology. So far, this video has only discussed certain case studies around this topic. But what are some of the research studies saying? Well, they show that evidence for hypnosis being valuable for memory recall is almost non-existent, and usually pointing the contrary belief. For example, in 2011, psychologists at the University of Kentucky were determined to find any association between recall and hypnosis. This is an overview of that study. This study used 60 undergraduate volunteers made up of 45 women and 15 men, each divided into 4 groups of 15 subjects. Each observed a complex visual display made up of photographs and a number of common objects, and 8 nonsense syllables. Subjects observed the display for 2 minutes and then were instructed to memorize the nonsense syllables in the time available. Following a 40-minute delay, the groups were questioned about the nonsense syllables and the other objects in the display. 2 groups were questioned under hypnosis. One was relaxed, and one was questioned while awake and alert. A week later, one of the hypnotized groups was re-questioned about the material observed while awake, and the other while relaxed. The remaining 2, the original relaxed and alert groups, were re-questioned under hypnosis. Results showed no significant differences between the 4 groups, in the amount of either the original or the incidental material learned and recalled. So, with all that being said, where does clinical hypnosis stand today? It's clear that hypnosis being used in the forensic field is practically gone. But what about the clinical field? Well, there are still some proponents of hypnosis being used for therapeutic measures that aren't involved in those accessing of quote-unquote repressed memories. In 2021, the American Journal of Clinical Hypnosis stated, "We explore a new distinction between the future prospective memory system being investigated in current neuroscience and the past retrospective memory system, which was the original theoretical foundation of therapeutic hypnosis, classical psychoanalysis, and psychotherapy. We then generalize a current evolutionary theory of sleep and dreaming, which focuses on the future prospective memory system to conceptualize a new evolutionary perspective on therapeutic hypnosis and brief psychotherapy." All of that is a lot of big words, and it can all be kind of confusing, and it's all interesting to think about, but the main thing is they're no longer focused on remembering the past memories and more so trying to create future memories, if that makes sense. All very interesting stuff, and there's a whole rabbit hole to dive down if you're interested.
We have conducted literally hundreds of experiments on somewhere near 20,000 individuals in which we deliberately try to manipulate their memories in order to study the process of memory distortion. Through these experiments, I've gotten people to recall non-existent broken glass and tape recorders. I've gotten them to recall a clean-shaven man as having a mustache. I've gotten them to recall a fellow with straight hair as if he had curly hair. And I've even gotten people to recall something as large and conspicuous as a barn in a bucolic scene that contained no buildings at all.
With regards to Dr. Loftus's concerns, I'm sorry that her feelings were hurt. I don't actually think that, at least I was disagreeing with her in the broadest notion of the notion that memories can be distorted. Of course memories can be distorted. Ask anyone who's hung out with me for more than about 5 minutes. I can't remember anything. The issue is only, do clinicians who work intensively with people who they have a substantial reason to see as valid and reasonable human beings, can clinicians work with those memories and get to a place that maybe Dr. Loftus would endorse more directly? I really don't think that the studies of non-traumatic memories involving whether you can create something out of a photo that was there or was not there is at all equivalent to a little kid being sodomized with a broomstick. I don't think barns equal broomsticks in this regard, and I don't think that it is in fact appropriate for people to use data from laboratory studies that have, and I'm a research methodologist, I don't want you to have me painted as some wide-eyed, one of those clinicians that we're all so worried about, although I'm proud to be that as well. The issue here is that methodologically it is not at all appropriate to look at a little kid's trial in some state where there's a allegation against a perpetrator and to bring in results of laboratory studies involving things that have nothing to do with the kind of experiences that kid alleged to have had occurred, and to therefore testify in that court case as if this is a state of knowledge. I think that we just have to, all of us as expert witnesses, have to make sure that what we bring to these situations are ecologically valid material.
The work that I'll be talking about tomorrow, really, I've just sort of selected 3 different studies that sort of span some of the more recent things that we've done. One of them deals with the issue about the recovered memory controversy. We did a lot of work with individuals who had reported recovered memories of sexual abuse in particular in our lab. We did a lot of experimental studies to try to understand how memory functioning works in these individuals compared to those people who've never forgotten that they had been sexually abused, and control subjects and people who believe they harbored repressed memories that they couldn't recall. Another interpretation of the phenomenon of recovered memory. At the time we embarked upon this project, there were sort of 2 opposing views of this matter. One was that traumatic events, in virtue of the fact that the stress hormones that are released at such times sort of make the memory highly memorable indeed, and often intrusive, as in the case of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so if someone claimed to have completely forgotten something that was presumably a trauma, they must be mistaken. That must be a false memory. Okay? Then they had other individuals who believe that the mind protects itself by banishing memories of trauma because they are so traumatic, sealing them away in such a way that they can only be unearthed with certain therapeutic techniques when the person was ready to do it. The so-called repressed memory of trauma.
Two plausible explanations, but very different.
Very, very different explanations. I think we had some evidence for the first and not much for the second, but then what sort of emerged as we were working with one of our last cohorts of these individuals, that there seemed to be a third interpretation of recovered memories. One that has nothing to do with repression, nor actually to do with trauma in the narrow sense of the word. We had individuals who reported having been sexually abused, molested typically, fondled, and some oral genital contact, but it never involved violence, never involved threats or terrors. It often involved somebody that they knew, a stepfather, grandfather. The kids were only 7 years old at the time, and they didn't understand it. They had no concept for it. And then the perpetrator dies. They move to a new neighborhood. They just forget about it. It was uncomfortable. It was anxiety-provoking. It was, but it was creepy, and they knew it was wrong sometimes because the perpetrator would say, "Shh, don't tell anybody about this. This is how I show that I love you." And the kid's wondering, nobody does this. This is weird, you know. But it's not the sort of thing as a brutal rape, the sort of terrifying trauma that provokes the stress hormones that would render such an experience vivid and intrusive for years later. And then they don't think about it for many years. And then they encounter some reminder. And boom, they say, "Oh my God, I remember my grandfather, uncle doing these sorts of things. That's what he was doing when I was sitting on his lap and he was touching me. So I'm a sexual abuse survivor. We're related. This is incest in the broad sense of the word."
And would one version of this be what's referred to as the recovered memory syndrome?
Well, I think they would in fact qualify for recovered memory. But here's the catch. At the time the event happened, it wasn't traumatic in the narrow sense of the word of provoking terror. And during the long period of time when the memory apparently never came to mind, we have no evidence that it was blocked or repressed because it was so traumatic. Indeed, it wasn't. And then when they encountered some reminder, they recall it like that. It's not as if it had to be painstakingly sort of pried loose, buried deep into the mind, nothing of that sort. Then, once they recover this memory, once they recall this and interpret it through the eyes of an adult for the first time, realizing that they were in fact sexually molested, that somebody was sexually exploiting them, somebody that they trusted. And now about a third of them were having PTSD symptoms, which in fact was a delayed onset PTSD, in virtue of the fact that they now understand what had happened. And so here's the irony of this. Yes, they forgot it for a long period of time, but not because it was so traumatic. Rather, they forgot about it because it wasn't so traumatic. They didn't understand it, and they didn't encounter reminders until later in adulthood.